The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. At that time, Jesus walked by the Sea of Galilee, went up on the mountain, and sat down there. Great crowds came to him, having with them the lame, the blind, the deformed, the mute, and many others. They placed them at his feet, and he cured them. The crowds were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the deformed made whole, the lame walking, the blind able to see, and they glorified the God of Israel. Jesus summoned his disciples and said, "My heart is moved with pity for the crowd, for they have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, for I fear they may collapse on the way." The disciples said to him, "Where could we ever get enough bread in this deserted place to satisfy such a crowd?" Jesus said to them, "How many loaves do you have?" 7, they replied, "and a few fish." He ordered the crowds to sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves and the fish, gave thanks, broke the loaves, and gave them to the disciples, who in turn gave them to the crowds. They all ate and were satisfied. They picked up the fragments left over, 7 baskets full. The Gospel of the Lord. I have become more and more familiar with this passage from the prophet Isaiah, and I spent a little time reading about Isaiah this morning. It's a beautiful reading. It comes up a couple times during the liturgy, regularly at Mass, but it's also one of the more common ones that we pick for funeral readings. And it is a reflection, I think, at a funeral on the mountain of Calvary. On this mountain, the Lord will provide for all people the choicest of wines. And when we think about the choicest of wines and we think about the mountain of Calvary, what does the wine become? The blood of Christ. And this banquet that our God provides for us. The banquet of healing, the banquet of new life, the banquet of transformation. The things that happen in the natural order, okay? Our bodies, the healing of the blind and the mute, the healing of the deformed, those healings that we heard about at the beginning of the gospel today, all of the miracles of Jesus that heal the body point to a greater healing. The food that is provided for the body point to a greater food. See, I like to reflect on the fact that perhaps the greatest miracle that Jesus performed in his lifetime and his ministry was the raising of Lazarus from the dead, right? Even though that incredible miracle, I mean, you can just imagine for a moment being in the graveyard and having somebody say, "Come out of the grave," and having someone come up out of the grave and they've been buried there for 3 days. I mean, that's a pretty big miracle, isn't it? But Lazarus died again, didn't he? And these blind and deaf and lame and deformed people that he healed on the mountain that we just heard about, they all got old and lost their sight again. They all got old and lost their hearing, or just died. So all of these miracles point to a greater miracle, right? And the wine that is provided on the mountain of Isaiah points to the wine that becomes the blood of Christ, that heals our soul, that heals us for eternity. So when these loaves are left over, we know, or we should know, and if you don't know, let me tell you. When the loaves are left over from the multiplication for the 4,000, when the loaves are left over for the multiplication of the 5,000, those loaves are waiting for the Last Supper. Those loaves are waiting to become the bread of life that will nourish us for eternity. So there's these beautiful layers always present in the prophetic words of the Old Testament and the fulfillment in the gospel. And on this mountain, this sanctuary, this mountain in this little church here, God will provide the finest of wine and the bread of eternal life for all of the healing for our soul, eternal healing.